Oh, he's dropping it. He's like real slippery. Okay, I just need to put a little powder on. Is that okay?
Well, you'll be the first one in 50 years.
I'm kidding. 50 years? You kidding me?
I'm not.
So you don't wear that stuff, huh? I don't blame
No.
you. It's just to knock off just a little shine. I'm not
I
gonna overdo it,
understand.
so.
No, that's the reason I've got good-looking skin.
There you go. That's true. You do have beautiful skin. That's it. All right. So Mr. Kicklighter, you ready, Mr. Kicklighter?
And take your own. If you could please give me your name and where you're from.
I'm Nancy Brooks. I was born here in Atlanta in the early 30s, in 1930.
Tell me a little bit about where you were at and what you thought when Pearl Harbor happened.
It was a tremendous shock to our family. We lived here in Atlanta, out on Peachtree Road. My uncle, my mother's brother, and his family were at Pearl Harbor at that particular moment. It frightened us very badly, and we were much concerned about that. Their first two children were with them. Harold Rusk was my uncle. He was in charge of a pool of international contractors that were building extensions to Pearl Harbor and the facilities that support them at that time. It happened on a Sunday morning, Pearl Harbor time, and he was called to the base to see what he could do to help with the construction, with the debris and with any facilities there. Since he was in charge of all of the construction, he had at his disposal very large equipment. He organized his men that were there to set up sort of a method of taking away what debris they could, of removing bodies by truckload from the area, and was there a number of days. The telephones were out. He was unable to contact his wife. She was 8 months pregnant at the time with their third child. For several days, he still couldn't maintain contact with her, and we at home were aware of that. We were extremely concerned about the ramifications of what had happened, both to our nation and to our family. After a few days, he did manage to get in touch with his wife and tell her that he was all right, but he would not be home for additional time. Ultimately, he did get home thoroughly exhausted by the tasks that they had performed for the country. It was a horrendous scene, as I'm sure you've heard for many times. About a year later, after their third child was born, he and his wife and 3 children came to Atlanta on their way to New York. They left the infant with us to keep until they got settled in their home, which was under construction in Paterson, New Jersey. His son, just a year old, had never worn clothes other than a diaper. He had never seen anything to resemble lighting in the home. He had was totally delighted when we would turn on the lights, and of course we had Christmas lights and all of that in the home. In fact, he had not learned to talk. after he'd been there a few days, he uttered his first recognizable word, and that was light. Mother had turned on the room light when she was changing his diapers, and he had great delight in that. My dad did too. He thought that was the funniest thing. Dead of winter, the kid had never worn clothes. You took everything off to change his diaper, and he would scramble across the bed, and great delight.
Tell me about some of the changes that happened in your household and around the neighborhood.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I just need to fix this mic. Hey.
It's showing. Run it through the buttonhole.
All right. Tell me about some of the changes that took place in the home, in your home specifically, after the war started.
We would entertain some of the servicemen that were stationed in Atlanta or were being treated at some of the military hospitals here on Sunday afternoon. Mother would invite a few of them to come to our house for a home-cooked meal. So we met a large number of the servicemen, 3 or 4 at a time, in our home. We lived in an area that was serviced by public transportation, so we're on the name of the USO list of people who would see these servicemen. So I fell in love with more than one of them. I was only 11 to 14 at that time. We also were involved with both the Red Cross and the defense, in the sense that Mother volunteered a lot for Red Cross activities, and I got roped into some of them. My brother was too young. We would offer our home for use as an air raid shelter and prepared it for housing people overnight in the basement in a closed-in room without any, I'll use an architectural word, fenestration, no windows. And we had food storage in the basement. We had bathroom facilities. We had water. And of course we had power, but you didn't want to use the power. And we had cots and blankets and provisions for a large number of people. I would say for us, it would be a large number. We did this for a number of months and then even for years, but it was never necessary to use for an air raid shelter. We did have periods of blackout in Atlanta, but we would retreat to the basement at that time. Late in the war, the number of people that were stationed here from other areas grew tremendously, and in particular medical people, both physicians and their families, needed housing. So we offered 2 bedrooms and 1 bath for rent. We occasionally had a physician and his family there for several months at a time. In fact, one physician had his wife, himself, his toddler, and a 18-month-old child and a nanny renting rooms in our house so that the family could be together. We did not offer food. They went out for their food or had it at the base. We saw just a tremendous number of service people on the public transportation which went in front of our house. It was a trying time because my brother and I had to share a bedroom. I felt I was too old for that, and he and I didn't exactly get along in those days.
Tell me about life on the home front with rationing?
Oh, goodness. Many things were rationing, food being the one that we paid most attention to. Tires were rationed for essential usage for the automobile. Shoes were rationed. We could only buy one or at most 2 pairs of leather shoes per year. For someone growing up and running around in the yard and playground, that was not really a comfortable amount of shoes because we'd skin them up. You could not get airplane tickets because all of the airplane passenger usage was reserved for servicemen. You could not get a train ticket for a seat. You could get on a train and stand up from Atlanta to New York or wherever you were going, but you could not get a seated place on a train. Some types of clothing were rationed. In particular, they were rationed to the point where we did not have any coupons. Nylon hose, for example, were non-existent. We had 2 methods of getting on stockings on Sunday when you're going to church. One was to paint them on, and the other one was to use the baggy rayon ones. The first time you bent your knees, they sagged. Trips by automobile were very restricted, even local transportation. The gasoline was rationed in different quantities depending on the necessity. The most popular one, if you call it popular, was the A coupon, and as I recall, that was less than 5 gallons a week, which is not due in this day and age. My dad had a C coupon because he was traveling and by automobile, and he would travel hundreds of miles, and it was for an industry that was declared essential. He was in the ice manufacturing business, and he was chief engineer for about 35 ice manufacturing plants throughout the country. He had responsibility for maintaining the production of all this equipment at a time when he could not get spare parts should equipment fail. The reason it was considered a critical industry is that all of the food products that required refrigeration in the whole country were shipped by refrigerated freight cars that had not refrigeration units but were iced down with ice. This was an entire industry that has essentially gone away because of modern refrigeration. There were no refrigerated trucks. There were no refrigerated local truckage. It was entirely by freight car. Produce that did not need refrigeration were things such as potatoes and onions and items like that, flour, what have you. But this really cut down the amount of fresh vegetables, fresh meats, and things of that nature that we were able to get.
To that end, did your family have a victory garden?
Oh, certainly, most certainly. Our property was 3 acres, and the back third of the property was devoted to a victory garden and a fruit orchard. We grew tomatoes. We didn't grow corn. It failed. We grew lima beans, string beans, squash, okra, the traditional southern vegetables that we depend on so much in this area. And then we would use the excess from what we needed to can for the winter, and also would get produce from my grandparents, both of my grandparents. One lived next door to us, and he had a garden, and one lived in Decatur, and he had a garden. But we canned for the wintertime, for our own usage, and occasionally gave it to others that were in need. It was quite a production in the summertime to go through the canning process. After we had picked all the vegetables, strung the beans, and what have you that goes along with that. Dozens and dozens of jars of canned goods.
So the canning supplies were relatively easy to get?
Cans of things commercially were easy to get. The supplies to do the canning were mostly glass jars with the metal lids. There was a facility at the Atlanta Farmers Market where you could go there and do the canning and put it in tins. Dry mouth time. It's not good.
What about? Do you remember at all how your family actually received all of the information and booklets for rationing?
I vaguely remember that. I believe they were mailed to us. I'm not sure. You would get a booklet with coupons in it that was designed to last a specific amount of time. There was no trading of coupons from one person to the next permitted, because you didn't tear your coupons out to use them until you made a purchase. And at that time, each individual would have to take his coupon out of his book, identify himself, and make the purchase for the coupon. As far as the gasoline is concerned, the coupon book went per automobile. So while Mother had an A coupon book and Dad had a C coupon book, they were automobile specific. So you would go to the filling station, and if your coupon book matched the automobile tag number or whatever, then you were permitted to get the gasoline. But it was much like the savings stamps that come in some areas, but it was very definitely time-oriented and tied to either an individual or an automobile. There was always a great race right before the time limit came up on one of the books to make sure you used the coupons. So it's a different way of handling the economy.
Did you ever know of or hear about even any black market?
Oh, certainly.
Tell me what sort of things you heard, what they would do.
There was a lot of activity. Now, remember, I was younger than 15 or 16, there was a lot of activity concerning the black market, and I'm sure there was a lot of trading back and forth in the less urban areas. I know we participated in some of it, you might say, since meat was rationed. We would not be able to get much meat at all. And my dad's company had at some of its facilities, as some of his ice manufacturing facilities, a cold storage where farmers would bring in their hams to be cured. And occasionally Dad would come home with a ham that he didn't have the coupons for. So he also would trade off certain things that he had an excess of in the way of real goods, a gun or what have you, and it would no longer be there. So I'm sure that we participated in the black market. But there were stronger things than that hit the newspapers all the time. I wasn't exactly a newspaper reader at that age as I am now, but it's not a foreign word to me.
What sort of changes did you perceive in Atlanta during the war?
Congestion, strangely enough to say. A lot of strangers around, a lot of foreign accents from people from other sections of the country. Strangely enough, not any increase in crime or anything. That was unheard of. As a teenager, a young teenager, I was able to go any place, anytime on public transportation by myself. Not the case today for a teenager without incurring any danger. The buses and streetcars were segregated at that time. This didn't have anything to do with the war. This was a hangover from the 1800s. There were, as far as our social life was concerned, there were news runs in the theaters between movies. There would be shorts on the news. The news was always full of war, and it wasn't always pleasant, but the crowding was on the public transportation. You had to stand up a lot. And I commuted to high school in the 11th and 12th grades on public transportation, and it was rare to get a seat.
What kind of perceptions did an 11 or 12-year-old girl have about segregation?
It was there. We had help at the house. We had a full-time maid. We had a gardener. We loved these people as if they were family. So that was my closeness to it. But it was just there. I didn't have any opinion about it one way or another. It was the way things were.
What about did your immediate family, your mom or dad or anyone, have any family that were overseas?
Yes, mother's sister, Nina Rusk, joined with several hundred other physicians and nurses. She was a nurse from Emory Hospital to reactivate the 43rd General Hospital in the Army. She and these others had worked together professionally for many years And the reactivation of the hospital was as a total hospital in the Army from Emory. Was a second version of the Emory unit that had participated in World War I. They spent about a year in Camp Livingston, Louisiana, organizing, getting all the support staff they needed trained before they went overseas. Initially, they went in with the invasion of northern Africa in Algeria, set up a secondary hospital. It was not the frontline one, but they handled a lot of the amputation cases and the more serious cases, and did the triage between treating soldiers and sending them back to the front line or sending them home. They served in Algeria until the Italians were defeated in North Africa. Then they were transferred to a Navy ship and served off the coast of Italy during the invasion of Italy as a general hospital, and ultimately in the invasion of or liberation of southern France. There they had a real live hospital to work out of. It had been designed, it was fairly new and had been designed as a tuberculosis sanitarium. They got there early enough that they were able to, the support staff and all were able to capture many of the German orderlies and what have you that were in the hospital. The Germans had been using it as a hospital. So they had enriched their staff with prisoners of war. She was a maxillofacial surgical nurse, and that's where they had the real severe head wounds. They did that for the Germans as well as for the military on our side, and the Germans were ever more grateful to get fine surgery done on them. So they had no problem with them working as prisoners of war alongside.
What were your perceptions of the Japanese and the Germans?
They didn't know what they were doing. They had no reason to attack us, and yet they did. We were gung-ho patriotic about everything and whole hog against what they had done and wanting to win that war badly on both sides. My career involved, over a period of time, all of the aspects of fighting the Cold War, and I didn't change my feelings one whit about the Russians versus the Germans and the Japanese versus the Koreans and things like that. My uncle also went to Korea and South Vietnam with his construction activities as a civilian on those. And war is not fun. War is not fun for the people who are at home. War is not fun for the guys that are out there, guys and gals that are out there. And it's necessary.
What was VE Day like in Atlanta?
I wasn't in Atlanta then. I was at camp in North Georgia as a camp counselor with 30 or so younger girls out on a overnight trip in an area where we had to camp out. We weren't in our camp cabins, but we had camped out. We had hiked 25 miles to this place. carrying our own bedding and what have you. And we were on a lake, on the shore of a lake in North Georgia. And all of a sudden, all of these speedboats kept going up and down the lake and up and down the lake. And everybody who vacationed up there was screaming bloody murder, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. They had the nerve to make us hike back the 25 miles to camp, to our regular camp, and didn't tell us about it, what had happened, why these people were acting like crazy people. And the reason we'd hiked in the first place was because gas was rationed, and they couldn't haul us to the outing or back. So we ultimately found out what it was. How it was in Atlanta, I don't know, but we were mad, mad, mad at that camp once we found out that they could have driven us back. It was a relief to my family, a great relief to my family. My aunt was still in France, I believe. I'm not really sure. But at any rate, about a few months later, she was discharged from the inactive Emory unit, but she stayed in the reserves until she retired from the reserves.
How did growing up during a war affect your future life?
That's an interesting one, because I graduated from high school early in '46. I was just 16. And the war was still in our minds. I really decided that I had to get into a technical field while I was in high school and made plans to go to college. It was really after I entered college that the war affected me. I went to Auburn because Georgia Tech was not co-ed, and I wanted to study architecture. I was one gal amongst 250 guys in the School of Architecture for first quarter freshmen. The next youngest member of my class was 7 years older than I. They had all been to war. They were there on the GI Bill, and they wanted to get through school in a hurry. It was a 5-year curriculum, 15 quarters long. The end of the first year, we had to take a vote as to whether we were going straight through summers and all or not. Several of our classes were 15 quarters long each and taught only once a year. It affected my life because I graduated the quarter I was 20 with a 5-year degree. By then, I could get along with any guy. I had no problem because I really was able to come out at the top of my class in school. But boy, did I have to grow up fast.
Of course, World War II affected the nation as a whole on so many different levels and in so many different ways. What do you think are some of the most significant and telling ways that it affected the nation?
Speaking really from someone who's spent their life career in fighting war, and I did do that. There are a lot of us, and we're a hidden voice quite often. The protests anger me. They anger a lot of people, the peaceniks. It's hard to understand why they can't see the dangers that are out there. Now, many of us didn't stay Democrat very often or for a long period of time. Those of us who participated in some process during our careers to continue defending the nation. While I have never had a uniform on, I have devoted my life to doing that. Even now, I'm still very adamant about the need for us to continue defending our nation and to continue attempting to bring democracy and freedom to people throughout the world. I won't be agreed with by many, but there are a bunch of us out here that really feel earnestly that we are on the right path. I think we became sensitive to, as a nation, to the needs of others. We were essentially isolationists prior to World War II, and we recognize that there are other countries that can use our assistance that we had not paid attention to before. And we have welcomed a lot of immigrants to this nation because of that need. Some we've welcomed that aren't welcome, but nevertheless the majority of them are.
This video and the exhibit will be seen by literally thousands of school kids. What do you want to tell them about, and what do you want them to remember about World War II?
There were a lot of valiant people. People were put in positions they had not been trained for or never expected, and yet they came through. People were versatile. They did it for those who followed them in life, and they did it for themselves too. It is a tremendous responsibility to do things for others, or to have to do things for others, but there are rewards in doing so. You can take responsibility for yourself and for others. It is rewarding to do that, and I would encourage them to look around and see those in need, and to see those that they can help, and to be cognizant of people with handicaps. If they didn't get that way, to just be different, but be cognizant of their needs and be friends with them. Not speaking as a mother, because I have no children, but just a general concerned individual. You get more back than you give.
That's very well said. Just one last question. Do you think that the national experience in World War II, I should say, tell me how you think or don't think the national experience from World War II, with women entering the military en masse for the first time and Rosie going into the factories and all of that, how did that affect the role of women in society?
Women have always struggled to, in general, to make a role for themselves other than the one that is traditional. I certainly went through that a number of different times. But the women in World War II showed that it could be done, that they could perform essential work. They could perform the same work. They have a brain that they can use, and it cut the ropes that detained women for later years. It enabled me, for instance, to get into a technical field that was for all women and earn the respect of my colleagues. And it might be said that I was a first in my class, a first in woman who did so-and-so, but it wasn't my aim to do that. I think that they took up the challenge and did a darn good job of fulfilling a need when the manufacturers were hurting, when the military needed the nurses, and later when the military needed the particular abilities of women in different areas. I'm glad that we now have the possibility of women to enter the service and be considered equals in many respects. We still have a long way to go, but it's coming. Excuse me.
That's a great interview. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to address?
No. There's a lot that we haven't covered, but it doesn't pertain to World War II. It's not pertinent to that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, my mouth got terribly dry.
It's okay.
Unhook. I can do that.
Sorry for the cold.
Did you become an architect?
Yeah, I'm an engineer, though. I went to graduate school in engineering.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What do you do as an engineer?
Hard-based design.
Hello. Hard-based.
Weapons vulnerability.
You kidding?
No.
It's kind of deep. What's weapons vulnerability?
It's taking a structure like this and making it less vulnerable to atomic.
Kidding? Wow, that's deep.
Isn't that cool?
That's deep.
I've been using computers for engineering problems for 53 years.
You talking to a computer illiterate there. And now you get emails and they send it to you and a couple of word perfect things and that's it. So that's great. That's a heck of a career.
I was.
So yeah, you really have been instrumental in
When I work on my
keeping
cold
us
war,
safe.
then I'll definitely have to talk to you two again then.
Yeah.
Well, I went to the University of Illinois for graduate school and I was in the civil engineering department there. And we, on our research project, I was one of the research.
You're one of those people that's instrumental in designing that technology for tornado-safe buildings now?
Yeah.
Don't they design all these structures now where
Aren't you scared? A woman had
no, not at all.
Seems to be working fine.
That works pretty good, that new technology now for hurricanes.
Well, we couldn't test because of the danger of radiation and so forth. So I did simulations on the computer.
That's amazing. She was like, she's been working on computers for 53 years.
How is it?
Bill Gates, who, right? He probably still a lot of stuff.
Oh, he wasn't even born then.
Yeah, that's right. He sure wasn't.